Russian, but please ensure that you mute the original audio while selecting. All documents for this meeting has been translated into Spanish and French. My apologies to my Russian colleagues. We haven't been able to do that, but for Spanish and French, all the documents have been translated. Later, we'll share the documents in the chat box for you to be able to have access to it. Please also make sure that you mute during presentations. Only unmute when it's time for questions and answers and you want to make a contribution. So kindly mute yourself and then unmute when you want to say something. If you have a question or intervention, you may also write it down in the chat box. We have a lot of people joining, so I believe it will also be helpful if we write our questions, our contributions in the chat box. We'll read it out. If you want to write it in English, it will be translated in all the other languages. And if you write it in either Spanish, French, or Russian, it will also be translated. If you want to make an intervention and you want to say it, you can also click on the participants icon and then there is a hand raise button there. You can also then click on that and ask, you'll be called and then you ask your question. So now we'll start the session. Once again, I thank you all for joining us. Women's empowerment and gender equality are key to sustainable development goals, not only as a goal in and of themselves, but also remains as a means to achieve sustainable societies for all. And I think was it last year, UN Women had a visualization data which indicated how countries are performing. And one of the things that they said was that when it comes to data on gender equality and you compare the countries, it's uneven. So then there is an urgent need for us to accelerate progress, else the entire global community will fail to achieve SDG 5. Resources required for acceleration of SDG 5 implementation are not available. When you look at the ODA report that was released, which is one of the major ODA, which is one of the major sources, seems to be depleting, has evidenced by the 2022 preliminary figures released in the ODA report, which revealed that significant redirection of ODA across DAC members towards humanitarian response, reconstruction, and refugee cost. Then you would also even, the SDG report that was launched on Monday also indicates it was looking at SDGs progress at midpoint. And it's only 50% of countries that are on track, 15%. And we are in mid-year, we've done 15 years, but only 15% is on track. 48% are moderately or severely on track. And then we have 37% that is stagnant. So if you look at these numbers, and we are aiming to achieve SDGs by 2030, then the records are not good for all countries. Making progress on gender equality, as envisaged by the SDGs, CEDAW, and the Women's Peace and Security agendas, require policy coherence centered on human rights and women's rights. And it also needs that we put all the resources available at the service of equality, justice, and peace. This implies addressing rare transformations on envisioning global solidarity, funding, and delivering resources versus aid traditional model. SDG 5 is not a major focus of voluntary national reports. So for when you look at this year, for instance, when you look at the goals that they are looking at, SDG 5 is not part of it. And this year is not only the case, all other years. And in cases where countries even decide to report on SDG 5, they fail to report on SDG 5C1, which focuses on putting transparent mechanisms in place to track public resources for women's empowerment and gender equality. So when you look at the country reports, the voluntary national reports, those that have reported on SDG 5, you will see that they've stated that we did this, we did that, we did that. But they don't show, if you want to track it, it's difficult to track. There are some that have internal systems that within the government sector themselves, public sector, they are able to track it. But if you are a CSO, if you are outside that system, there are no public mechanisms that will enable you track to know the exact resources that go to support women's empowerment and gender equality. And this is of great concern to us as feminists. This virtual session seeks to interrogate ODA from a feminist lens, explore how governments can accelerate SDG implementation through gender transformative reforms, and highlight interventions promoting women's rights and gender equality as part of efforts in transforming the system as intended by the SDGs. Now, I would like to introduce our organizers. This event is organized by the Network for Women's Rights in Ghana, in collaboration with CSO Partnership for Development Effectiveness Feminist Group. The Feminist Group is one of the core constituencies of CPDE, with members across the world. And for you who haven't heard about CPDE, CPDE is an open global platform that unites civil societies from across the world. So we also take this opportunity for those who are not members of CPDE, we take the opportunity to invite you to join CPDE, especially the the feminist group. Its members come from 6 regions and 8 major sectors. And so we have, when you come to CPDE, we have the feminists, which is organizing this side event. We have faith-based organizations. We have indigenous people, international CSOs, labor, migrants, rural, and youth. And they are all sectors of CPD aside the regional regions, which have Africa, Latin America, has Asia, has Pacific, has Europe, and has Canada. I hope I've made justice to all the regions and sectors. Together, its members strive for a more effective development, the kind that truly responds to poverty and equality. Towards this end, CPDE promotes a human rights-based approach to development. We uphold accountability in development cooperation and build the capacity of CSOs to engage in various advocacy arenas. In all these endeavors, the platform is driven by the aspirations and struggles of the impoverished and marginalized, and the vision of a free and equal world for all. And when you visit the CPDE website, CSO, when you type CSO partnership and you go to the CPDE website, you find more details and also information about the feminist group that is organizing today's side event. Within CPDE's governance structure, the feminist group has a permanent seat as one of the co-chairs of the global platform. And we have our co-chair here with us. We'll introduce her shortly. We are currently made up of, and I'm talking about the feminist group, made up of 81 organizations from across the world. And our current global and regional coordinators are, so we have global coordinator in the person of Patricia Blanksina Kako. We have feminist co-chair Nugu Geneva. In Africa, we have NETRIGHT and Mosunet. So NETRIGHT from Ghana and Mosunet from Mali has the African coordinators. Asia, we have Forum of Women's NGOs of Kyrgyzstan, and Beyond Beijing Committee in Nepal has Asia coordinators. Europe, we have SEM Spain and White Plus has Europe coordinators. Latin America, we have Coordinadora de la Mujer, Bolivia, and then we have Humanas, Chile has coordinators. MENA region, we have New Women Foundation, and then Tunisian Association for Democratic Women. Past Pacific, we have Pacific Foundation for the Advancement of Women. We are yet to get a coordinator for US and Canada. And we hope at the end of this event, when you join CPD, we may have other colleagues from that region that will join the feminist group. I will take this opportunity now to introduce our next speaker, who has been in over a decade of, who is the co-chair of the CSO Partnership for Development Effectiveness. Remember, I mentioned that the feminist group has a permanent seat on the governance structure, the steering committee of the global platform. So we have our co-chair here. She's also the executive director of the Forum of Women's NGOs of Kyrgyzstan. She has over a decade of involvement in aid and development effectiveness arenas. She has demonstrated strong engagement in the struggle for democratic ownership, adequate accountability, and feminist issues at local, regional, and global levels. She is also an organizing partner of the Women's Major Group for SDGs and an initiator and member of the UNESCO Resim governing body. So I introduce to you Nugo Janeva. Nugo will now set the tone for this section. Nugo, you are welcome.
Thank you very much, dear Patricia. I'm very pleased to be invited here, and I'm part of this group. Let me welcome you all on behalf of CPDE to this CPDE Feminist Group event, which has tremendous meaning for further strengthening implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals in our countries. As a feminist co-chair of the CPD, I'm very happy to see quite a big number of participants. Congratulations, Patricia, and I hope this will be followed up by active engagement of all development actors in improving women's rights, gender equality in our countries. Globally, there is recognition that women's rights are core for the sustainable development. Yet, gender equality remains the greatest human rights challenge. Inasmuch as governments have made appreciable gradual progress in advancing women's rights and gender equality, structural inequalities continue to persist in many countries, preventing the full achievements of gender equality and implementation of women's rights. CPD Feminist Group was constantly raising attention to means of implementation to the SDG number 5. FG challenged the effective implementation of political commitments made by governments, such as lack of adequate funding and accountability mechanism to ensure advancement of women's rights and gender equality at various international fora. And I think it's worth to mention that FG, being part of the Civil Society for Development Effectiveness platform, has the opportunity to raise it globally, and it's a unique actually group who is constantly during many years was raising attention to this underinvestment to women's rights issues. The feminist group also challenged lack of transparency, accountability, participation, and inclusion of civil society and women's organizations on government's policy decision-making on finance. The feminist group analysis of the VNRs revealed that while countries report on many indicators for SDG 5, only few report on SDG 5C1. Country reports on 5C1 only enumerate funds allocated for gender equality and women's empowerment, but still they fail to show systems that have been put in place to allow public tracking of such allocation to enhance transparency and accountability. Our group, FGCPD group, reiterate the need to integrate gender-responsive budgeting into country public financial management and financial management information system to ensure performance on gender equality and empowerment of women, transparency, accountability in the use of public funds, so that no official feels it is an added burden. No person, group, community, gender feels left out, as well as enable free access of information to public. FG Group also were coming up with key asks to address precisely this issue of underinvestment. FG called to allocate funds, reform fiscal processes, capacitate staff, and report to public annually. But unfortunately, it is not happening. And if you go today, well, you are those who are in New York, you will see that SDG 5C1 indicator is actually missing out of the reports. We called for more money and other resources as follow-up commitments on providing financial resources to women to be allocated from state budget, local budget, ODA, development funds, public-private partnership funds, private sector, and other domestic resources. We also have key asks to increase accountability. We call all countries to oblige to report on indicator 5C1, including reporting on gender equality as a cross-cutting issue on all the SDGs. Since it is not reviewed annually, most countries do not report on this SDG 5C1. And unfortunately, the indicator 5C1 is still in the tier 2. So we all together should advocate to hiring up the level and make it obligatory. During the work on this indicator on addressing underinvestment, Feminist Group continued its work in gendering CPD advocacy. So we were not only bringing to UN, to governments, but we were engendering CPD advocacy and aligning our work with CPD's overall strategic advocacies. We come up with, and I call your attention to the position paper. Later on, you can find it on CPD site, FG advocacy position paper on SDG 5 for last year HLPF and HLM high-level ministerial meeting, Global Partnership Summit, which was held last December in Geneva. And we called to contribute to gendered application of effective development cooperation for SDGs. The issue is very serious, and we were raising in different arenas. We were raising in the UN.
Please, can you wrap up for us?
Sorry?
Please wrap up for us.
Yeah, this is my last minute. Thank you so much, Patricia. So this serious attention is needed to 5C1, and we were raising it in different arenas, including, for example, regional sustainable development forums in different, we were raising it in Geneva among those who are providing funding, ODA. We were raising it within countries. For example, Patricia, friends from Bolivia, from Nepal, were raising with their governments. Keeping attention to the serious gaps in means of implementation for SDG 5 is important. We even called last year side event at HLPF with the title, listen to the title, Left Behind Orphan, Financing Women's Rights and Gender Equality. Let's work together not to leave behind, not to keep financing women's rights as orphan. Let's connect political promises with investment, proper, adequate, transparent, accountable investment. Thank you so much, Patricia.
Thank you, Nugo. Yes, Nugo has set the tone for our discussion. Well, globally, human rights is recognized, but also it's a huge human rights challenge. In earlier discussions, I did mention that ODA is, when you look at the preliminary 2022 report, ODA is redirecting its resources for the Ukraine-Russian war, for instance. This morning, we are going to assess how ODA for women's, we are assessing ODA for women's empowerment and gender equality work. How are governments meeting gender budgeting commitments? Because really, if we want to push for transformative financing for women's rights and gender equality work, then it means that we need to do a robust gender responsive budgeting. So how are governments going to do that? And we have in our midst, we have Sebel Sessa. I hope I got the name right. She's a political analyst at the Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment team in the OECD Development Cooperation Directorate. She works with the Dark Policy Network on Gender Equality to better track aid investments and analyze finance for gender equality in development assistance. Sebel also coordinates the work on the interlinkages between gender equality and environment in development cooperation. And this morning, we are happy to have her here to tell us how governments are ensuring that they embark on a gender transformative financing to promote women's empowerment and gender equality. Sebel, you are welcome.
Thank you, Patricia. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. And thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today and to speak to you. I was asked to talk about official development assistance for gender equality and women's empowerment. And I selected two images that I think are the most interesting ones for us to see here today. But before I go into the images, I thought it would be useful that we take a short step back and that I give a bit of context to you on our work and on the figures and the data that we have. So at the OECD, many of you know the other teams and other actors. So they find that this is very useful to have targets, financial targets inside their organizations to include gender equality and ODA. This ranking here that you see is an example of an accountability mechanism that we have thanks to the data that we collect. I wanted to mention briefly about ODA to support women's rights organizations and movements. I don't have a slide on this, but I just wanted to share with you the figures. So in the last period, 2020-21, only $574 million of ODA were committed to support women's rights organizations and movements. So 574 million, that's about $500 million, and that represents less than 1% of total ODA. So it's very small. And the Netherlands was the main partner for that with almost 1/3 of this amount. And we know that they use several financing mechanisms to be able to partner with and support women's rights organizations and feminist movements. So I want to close just by sharing some of the work that we do with the DAC members. So my last slide is just some images of things that we produce to support them. I don't see it yet, but I think the slide will be coming soon. I'll start anyway. We have the GenderNet, which is the network where members come together with other actors and to discuss and to learn from one another. There on the left, you can see our detailed guidance with detailed information on how to integrate gender equality from the design phase of activities during implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. It has examples, it has checklists to help our members accelerate progress on this. We give training, we give advice as well, and we produce regular analysis showing trends, comparing members to create some pressure. You can see on the right there the latest snapshot of ODA for gender equality. And in the middle is just a post that we put on LinkedIn where we also share our data to increase accountability. This data from the OECD is public. Many of you use it for accountability and to draw attention to these important issues. I'll stop here, Patricia. I hope that's all right. And I look forward to hearing reflections and thoughts that you may have on this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sebel, for taking us through the trends and showing us the amounts that, the funds that are allocated for gender equality, ODA that is allocated for gender equality. And for me, what stands out is that it's less than 1%. So it means that really, yes, it's a call for action. We need to push to ensure that more resources are put to supporting gender equality. And we are not good with our time, so I'll quickly move to the next speaker, who will look at localizing support through co-creation of innovative ideas to accelerate achievement of the SDGs gender targets. As we push for gender responsive budgeting, as we push for transformative financing for gender equality, what are some of the things that are being done to ensure that we achieve the gender equality that we are all envisaging? We have with us Patricia Isabel Issel, who is the project lead for a Global Affairs Canada funded project titled Women's Voice and Leadership Project with Plan International Ghana. Patricia currently works with over 81 local women rights organizations in Ghana to advance gender equality. Patricia holds a master and MBA degree in administration and also in project management. She's a trained facilitator and has great passion for the vulnerable, especially rural women and children. Patricia, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Patricia, and thanks to the CSO Partnership for Development Effectiveness for having me here. It's been raining here. I'm not sure whether you can hear me very clear, but it's been raining cats and dogs in Ghana at this moment, and I'm sure I'm audible enough for people to hear me. So please pardon me if you hear a lot of noise at the background. It's been raining, so please take note of that. So I do this presentation on behalf of the country director of Plan International Ghana, and then also on behalf of our team in Plan Canada for allowing me or giving me this opportunity to join this event and to share practically the work that we've been doing in Ghana as a response to accelerating the financing of SDG through gender transformative investment. So you all agree with me that Sustainable Development Goal puts forward a broad and ambitious agenda. And in achieving this agenda, one has to be more deliberate, have a more deliberate approach, coupled with new modalities for development, including being very innovative at all levels. And additionally, sustainable development model, as well as transformative investment, are major drivers when it comes to addressing issues around sustainable development goals, mostly targeting and investing in initiatives that addresses the root causes of gender inequality. And as I mentioned, I am here to share a typical innovative approach that Global Affairs Canada initiated from their feminist policy, looking at the fact that to address gender equality or to address poverty, we need to invest in women-led organizations. And at that, for that matter, women interventions or interventions that are addressed typically at gender inequality. Please, can you go to the next slide? So this particular program, I think unfortunately you are sharing the Spanish version of my slide. So if I can have the English one, but I'll still speak to it. So for the feminists from Global Affairs, like I mentioned, they intended to look at poverty, addressing poverty by investing into women-led organizations, because they believe that they have the answers to the issues that of important needs to them. And when this policy or this program, that is the Women Voice and Leadership Program, emanated from the policy, It was targeting about 21 partners, partnering with 21 organizations, including Plan International Canada. And Plan International had 2 projects in Ghana and in Ethiopia. And overall, we are looking at about 32 projects across 30 countries in Ghana. As a background, the next slide, please. The background to the WVL project in Ghana. I am sharing that as an innovative response to financing gap. We know in the past, we have had issues where organizations are closing down, where financing dwindled to the minimum point, where organizations lost their source of income, their source of livelihood and all that, because we had reduction in financing. And also for the fact that this particular WVL project is directly addressing gender transformative needs, and it's directly addressing needs of organizations that they have realized themselves, the needs that they have realized themselves. Please go to the next 2 slides. I think my slides are delaying. I don't know what you are seeing on your screen.
We are seeing it.
Yeah. So this particular model, as I mentioned, is used as one of the innovative models of addressing the gender gap, as well as a good model for localization when it comes to shifting of power from the donor level to the local organizations that we work with. And at the center of all this equation is gender equality, anchoring other SDG goals, especially goal 1, 4, 8, and 10, and also premised on the feminist principles of co-creation, being collaborative, meaningful participation, and most importantly, bringing decision-making down to the level of the direct project beneficiaries or people who are directly affected by the entire process. Can we move on, please? So for WVL Ghana, as a test case, we would say that it's using 3 key approaches or using many feminist dimensions, as I spoke earlier. And the 2 key feminist principles that is riding this entire project is the fact that you cannot do anything for WROs without them, as well as they are in the driver's seat and steering the affairs of the entire intervention. And you bear with me that all of us on this call will agree that when you are driving by yourself, you enjoy the driving because you detect the pace to which you go. You detect when you should stop, when you should accelerate, when you should take a rest. You detect even your destination and how you get there. So this is how the entire project is programmed, that we put the key women-led organizations that we are working with at the driver's seat when it comes to decision making, and all at the different levels through the designing of the project to the closure of the project. Can we go to the next stage? So we are using 3 key interventions in terms of innovation to bridge the gap, the financing gap, and also to address issues around the SDGs. One is to do with organizational strengthening, where we invest in organization in terms of their capacity enhancement, because we realize that one of the root causes for which organizations like local organizations don't attract funding is because they are dealing with other things that may not attract more funding. Some of them, their structures are not well equipped to attract additional funding, or let's say core funding. So this particular project builds on that, so that all the structural barriers that are hindering organizations or women to live to their full potentials are addressed. The second strategy that the project used that for me, it's very critical for bridging the gap is providing funding to organizations. And in this case, we are talking about organizations that are big national level organizations. So we have two key organizations that we work with. And I'm happy to say that NETRIGHT is one of our organizational development partners. And then we also partner with WOTAF, Women in Development in Africa. Aside providing funding to these two organizations, hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Patricia. Go, please go on.
We also provide funding to women-led organizations on a multi-year basis. So we have that works courses or gender transformative programming that they can best deliver their goals on that area. And I must say that one of the innovative ways of doing this is the grants that are given are not grants that are dictating to organizations as to where to push their effort, but rather is based on self-identified needs, premised on the feminist principles that I mentioned earlier on. And then the third phase or the third key strategy that aids us to bridge the gap is to do with the fact that we are looking forward that we will not work in silos as organizations, as women-led organization. We would collectively have our voices together so that we can advocate for issues that best affect us and issues that best give us the needed solutions that we need. And in doing that, we would all be able to enjoy our human rights to the highest level and also address gender equality. Can we go to the next, please? So on your screens, I don't know which one that you see. So these are some few areas that we have chalked successes. I would say that in terms of achievement for this innovative project, we have given out 105 grants to 81 grantees. And these 81 grantees are of different levels. We have multi-year grants, we have flexible grants that are quick responsive grants to organizations who have as low as 2 staff, organizations who are located in areas that under normal circumstances, no one would go there and see their group. And thankfully enough, the total amount of 5 million, the total amount that was received for the grant, about over 50% of the total grant goes directly to the local partners that we work with, the women-led organizations that we work with. And we are addressing issues to do with leadership, decision-making, gender-based violence, economic empowerment, sexual and reproductive health rights, among many others. So these are tackling root causes, social norms, and the like to ensure that our work is well recognized and we address the issues that affect us most in our respective jurisdiction. In terms of learnings for our organization.
Patricia, you are muted. Please unmute.
I don't know. Someone keeps unmuting me.
It's fine. It's because, and let me take this opportunity to say that if you are only unmute yourself when you are speaking, if you are not speaking, please mute yourself so that we don't get the noise and noise at the backgrounds from different participants. Thank you. Patricia, please go on.
Okay, but
and kindly wrap up.
Yeah, so I'm wrapping up with some few lessons we have learned. The fact that we are engaging networks with a large number of members and individuals, including the young generation and the old generation, to be part of this entire process. And the fact that they sit and drive the entire project as to how it should be done in addressing their identified need. The other lesson for us in the entire project and an innovative one, of course, is with the feminist principle that I mentioned earlier on. And finally, this project is very flexible and adaptive. So you can, at a point in time, if you realize that your intervention is not addressing the specific need, you can modify, adapt, or adjust and be innovative and ensuring that that is done for you. And in conclusion, I would say that we cannot address sustainable development without addressing gender equality work. And my earlier speakers have mentioned some few issues relating to that. And I would say that it is important for us to invest in girls, women, and boys who with a required approach. And we should be intentional about that to ensure that we are putting in place good gender budgeting, we are monitoring our government in that direction, and we are investing in women and girls to ensure that we meet our SDG goals as required. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And I want to end by saying a very big thank you to Global Affairs Canada for this beautiful initiative and for putting smiles on the faces of women and girls in addressing these issues that we've been discussing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patricia. Without gender equality, there's no sustainable development. So we should keep that in mind. In our conversations around localization and shifting of power, for us as feminists, it's important for us to push for ensuring that resources go to women rights organizations. And it's not also even just about the resources, but how qualitative they are and the kind of things that they are able to address. So for us, it's critical for us. And I always say that one of the things that is unique about the Women's Voice Leadership program is that it allows you to dictate your own pace. Yes, we talk about co-creation, and at times when you talk about co-creation, it's co-creation where there is a predetermined agenda. So then you are brought on board to co-create. But this is one of the programs that when it talks about co-creating, you are already working on an issue, and it gives you the flexibility to continue working on that issue. We are grateful to you, Patricia, for throwing more light on the innovative ways that through the Global Affairs Canada support, Plan International is embarking on to support women rights organizations, to support feminist organizations, to do what they know how to do best. Please, on your screens, you see the view options, and in the view options, you can select the language that you will want presentations that are projected, are displayed in. So you can select that. I'll also plead with you that if you are not making any intervention, kindly mute yourself. You only unmute when you have to speak. I also encourage you to put to write your contributions on the chat, in the chat box. I'll open the floor now for questions. If we have questions for our two speakers, this is the time to raise our hand. You click on the participants icon and then click on the hand raise button, and then you'll be called. If there are also questions in the chat box, we'll read it for our speakers to respond to it. So now the floor is open. We've exceeded our time, so let's do like 5 minutes for questions and answers. So if you have any question, you can please raise your hand and you'll be called. And Fanny, my co-facilitator, kindly help me if there are questions in the chat box. I see one hand up. Shaima.
Yeah, hello. Thank you so much, Patricia, for the great panel and the discussion, which is really, I would say, heated right now. And I'm speaking, my name is Shaima Ali, and I am head of several feminist groups in Egypt, Middle East and North Africa, where financing is really an issue for us, especially in humanitarian context countries. So my question, maybe it is for all panelists. For example, we heard that about a huge percent that are going to support women feminists and women groups, maybe globally. But I would like to ask two questions. The first about the division and the equitable division, I would say, or distribution of such amounts or such assistance, even speaking about ODA among regions, how we can be prioritized giving the severe situation, the humanitarian situation in the region, and of course the women demands and needs, which are maybe, like I would say, increased recently due to this situation as a geopolitical situation. The second question about also the women feminists engagement in the process. I would say, like, are there any consultations with, like, for example, small civil society organizations and women-led non-governmental organizations in general sense? Because unfortunately, sometimes we see, I would say, that controlled by some specific groups of the entire financing structure. So this is something, these are my two questions, and I hope that we, the panelists, can answer them. But thank you so much for today's discussion. Over to you.
Thank you, Shaima. Please, you can lower your hand now, and I'll call Aiko.
I have also raised hand.
Aiko, I called Aiko. Aiko, please, you have the floor. Aiko, kindly unmute and then let's hear you. Aiko, unmute and then let's hear you. Can we go to Shanta? Shanta, you said your hand is up.
Thank you, Patricia, and thank you for all the presenters. It is really excellent. And I have a concern and question to Sibel. And first of all, it is excellent presentation for knowing us about the ODA spent on especially the women's movement and leadership. You know, it is less than 1%. So, and also we have already came to know the Patricia's presentation when the ODA is spent more on feminist organization, it will automatically goes to for the gender equality. So learning from this and having said this, my question is how can we really work with GenderNet? I think the OECD's women's group is GenderNet. I'm right, if not mistaken. How can we make GenderNet more powerful, more enlightened, more empowered, so that the DAC countries, you can make a voice together with us to a DAC country to really invest. I would like to use the word invest ODA more on, this feminist movement and feminist leadership. Another question is, since there are definitely a creditor reported system based on significant end principle as an objective of gender equality. So my question is, as you know, this from Beijing Platform of Action to now, for the gender equality, there are two simultaneous approaches. One is gender mainstreaming, which is financing in all, looking at all the finances from the gender perspective. That is one thing. I think that's what that country is doing more on that. Rather than another is and also the standalone or financing for gender equality as a sector in itself. That is very much which doesn't really, gender responsive budget system doesn't really report on that and doesn't really promote on that. So what is your opinion on that, and how can we increase financing for gender equality as an affirmative action to bring gender equality globally by the year 2020, by the year 2030? Because only mainstreaming, it doesn't work. Because, for example, I'm talking from Nepal case, and there is a study as well when it comes to gender responsive budget system. Even if it is
Shanta, please wrap your question.
Okay, so my question again is how to increase finance for gender equality affirmatively on the feminist movement and leadership, not only as a mainstreaming, but as a specific sector in itself. That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Shanta. We'll take Aiko. Aiko, are you ready now? You can unmute yourself. Yes. Okay, Aiko, let's hear you. We can't hear you, Aiko. Unmute yourself and let's hear you. Whilst waiting for Aiko, we have questions in the chat. Fanny, please help us if we have questions in the chat.
There's no questions in the chat so far.
Okay, so let's, Aiko. Okay, Aiko says he has technical issues. So I'll go back to the speakers to share their thoughts on the questions that have been asked.
Yes, shall I start?
Yeah? Of course,
okay.
Sibel.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much for the interest and for the very good questions on this. So let me first get to Shanta on ODA for women's rights organizations. Yes, indeed, less than 1%. And indeed, what you said about the Beijing, the twin track approach, right, that we talk about mainstreaming gender equality throughout policies and programs at the same time as implementing dedicated projects that target specifically gender equality. So yes, the members adopt this twin track approach. And as you saw in my second image, they do that at different extents. So some focus more on the mainstreaming, while you have others like the Netherlands, Canada, Iceland, Spain that are very much focusing their ODA on programs that are targeted for gender. We, from the CRS system, as you asked, we do not track gender equality as a sector. It's not a sector per se, but we can see how much of ODA is focused on gender equality as the main goal. So that's what we see in the principle there. And your question about working together with GenderNet, I think that's the idea of the GenderNet Plus. So we have this structure where we bring other actors, and we have many that come to our meeting yearly, and where we discuss, we try to look for solutions together, as you said, to have a common voice to invest in ODA for feminist movements. For Shaima, shall I try to, yeah? Patricia, do I go ahead? Yeah?
Yes, go ahead.
So Shaima, your question about the division and distribution among regions. So the latest assessment that we have shows that Africa and Asia are the main regions receiving this, about 1/3 each. And what you said about how to coordinate, I think this is a very important point about the importance of coordination among the different donors to ensure that there is enough funding for the different needs, and what you said about the women's needs increase due to the political situation. So that's something that involves and requires coordination. The GenderNet network is a place where that happens. And certainly the consultations with women-led organizations, which you mentioned, there are some countries that do this particularly well. We heard about Global Affairs Canada, the Netherlands. They have good examples of how they do that, and they share that with others. And we also learn from the organizations themselves when they come to the GenderNet Plus meetings.
Yeah, Patricia, do you have any
questions?
Yeah, you want to respond to?
Just a quick one to what has just been shared and bringing it down to the local level and how WVL and its partners have been able to collate information or come together in terms of advocating or asking for direct funding to women organizations. So what the project has done or is doing for its members is also looking at bringing the voices of people who are at the very grassroots and whose voices would usually not be heard at the national level. So these voices are brought at the network level from the organization to, let's say, NETRIGHT or the other partner being worked with. And then NETRIGHT echoes that voice at the national level and also ensures that when it comes to funding, it would not be determined before it gets to the project participants, but enough room will be given so that project participants are able to identify their own needs and address them. And then we are also trying our best to link partners who already have funding with us to other donors, locally and internationally, so that the funding gap widens rather than narrowing. And then we do that through consultation and others. So this is just to share the practical one locally to add to what has been said. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia and Sybil. I see Fanny's hand up. Fanny. And I see that we have few contributions, questions in the chat box.
Akio, who had some technical issues earlier, wrote a basic question in the chat. So his question is, OECD's gender marker is a great effort for seeing the proportion of ODA going to gender equality. However, there is always a possibility of inflating the numbers, especially the significant parts. How can we prevent this? Also, how can we work on the possibility of including projects or programs whose beneficiaries are women that are just charitable projects and not really addressing inequalities? This was Akio's question, which is also pasted in the chat.
Any more questions or contributions that you can read for us?
Yes, there is one other question from Fred Sullivan. He's asking, how can we increase women's entrepreneurship and funding for this? Can governments implement policies such as the employer of last resort so women can get engaged in the jobs market and create more social protection through employment, especially in the green jobs, care, and tech sector? This was Fred Sullivan's question.
Okay. Any more? We don't have any hands up, so I'll move to the speakers to, I think most of the questions are to Sybil. So you respond to it.
Excuse me, Patricia.
Yes.
Sorry, just one last thing. I've seen several persons speaking Russian who are actually pasting maybe their questions or interventions in Russian in the chat. The problem is that we don't speak Russian in the Global Secretariat. So if you want to intervene in Russian, please raise your hand and take the floor because we have interpreters who will then be able to translate your questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, so our Russian colleagues, please, the questions that you've posted in the box, kindly raise your hand and repeat it so that the interpreters can pick it and then explain to us for our speakers to respond. So whilst we are waiting for our Russian colleagues, I'll move to the speakers to respond to the questions that were raised in the chat box, those that they will want to. Then we'll pick our Russian colleagues.
All right, let me try. These are great questions, and I will do my best to answer them. So Fred, increase in the amounts for social protection and employment, certainly, and I think members increasingly see this as, for financing to be transformative, we need to address the root causes, the intersectionalities, the structural inequalities. So there's a lot of work that has to be done for the root causes, and there's certainly funding that has been going for that, and we have plenty of data, and we can look at this into detail if you want to see what goes for which sectors, to see how much and what has been happening over the years. In terms of how can CPDE, the feminist group, work for transformative financing, concrete suggestions, I think this is the kind of thing that we have been doing and we should continue doing, working together to have one voice, to learn from one another, and to look for strategies to accelerate progress on this. So I think it's collaboration and partnership, and we have been doing this and we should continue doing this forward. Rosabelle, demand for greater accountability in the objectives and processes, and monitor that what they claim is in fact in line with the objectives. And also there was a question about the gender marker system and inflating the numbers. There's a very strong quality check inside the OECD to ensure that the reporting is done correctly. We do a lot of training with the members to make sure that they report comprehensively and correctly. But at the end of the day, this is a self-reporting, and even if we have directives and training, the reporting involves some judgment calls, but we check, and this is we have the opportunity of having this data with the evidence, and we can use that to compare and to push for more progress. If I haven't answered, please feel free to contact me after this, and I'm happy to continue the conversation. And I'm sorry if I haven't answered everything that was asked. Thank you.
Yeah, it's fine. Patricia, do you have anything to say before we move to our Russian colleagues?
I think Sybil has said it all, because most of the questions I know is directed at her. Yeah. But I would also want to add that at the national level, as civil society organizations who are joining this call, we also have a key responsibility to ensure that our government, our country, our states are also working towards budgeting appropriately with adequate funding to support these interventions, to support these entrepreneur greenhouse and all that we've been pushing for. So we should take that up in terms of advocating, and we can do that through a collective action and voice to ensure that that is done for us.
So we'll take Ziboniso Sharifova. I hope I've mentioned the name correctly. Ziboniso, you have the floor.
Да, здравствуйте, спасибо большое. Я послушала все панельные доклады. Просто молодцы, очень большая работа проделывается в странах. Но меня зовут Дисебу Шарифова, я из Таджикистана. Это Центральная Азия. И у меня вопрос к Патриции Эсель. Она говорила о проектах, которые поддерживаются со стороны их организаций, но или я пропустила, или я была невнимательной, но я прослушала, как можно подать к ним проект и как называется их организация. Спасибо большое за ответ.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. There is another hand up. I can't mention the name, so please unmute yourself and ask your question. One of our Russian colleagues has her hand up, but the name is in Russian, so I can't. So please unmute yourself, you're right, and ask the question.
Добрый день. Я немного поздно подключилась, потому что была другая конференция параллельно. Но каждый говорит сразу включает свои проблемы. Дело в том, что наша республика просто оказалась выброшена из общего такого движения за гендерное равенство и вообще процесс разрешения гендерных вопросов. И снова вернуться очень сложно сейчас в нашей ситуации. Мы просто нужны. Вся Россия находится в этом состоянии стагнации, в смысле женской работы, женского движения. Но именно, особенно наша республика пострадала очень сильно. Даже кризисный центр для женщин пришлось закрыть. Он в июле месяце закрылся, потому что никакого внутреннего финансирования невозможно получить. Внешне очень сложно, и все пути обрезаны. Как вернуться снова в это сообщество? Как установить связи, контакты? Как с этой обочины, с этой дороги, наоборот, влиться в нашу общую работу заново для нас стало проблемой. И очень хотелось бы найти возможности, контакты, да, прежде всего контакты, и поговорить конкретно, где какие возможности, доступ, да, способы получения поддержки, разной поддержки, информационной, финансовой, моральной. Вот у меня возникли сразу вот такие вот вопросы. Все, я все сказала.
Thank you. Do we still have, I think now, looking at the time, I know there are some questions in the chat box. Fanny, can you quickly go through them? And then we move to the next section where we'll get participants also to share country level, right?
So we have one question from Kupila Rijal from Nepal. She says, hey, I am from Nepal. What will be the gender transformative approach for the women entrepreneurship development for underdeveloped country like Nepal? Then we have also Halima Abubakar Fodi from Niger, who says that there are a lot of funding promises or prospects. However, their local NGOs struggle to get the funding they need to work. These funding are not really accessible. And she's asking, how can we apply to your projects? And yeah, I think that's it. We also had a comment from Chantal earlier who said that, thank you, Sibel, for the response. How can the CPDE Feminist Group work for transformative financing for gender equality? Could you give us your suggestion as a feminist? That's it.
Yeah, I think Sibel respond to that question. So I'll move to the speakers. For the two questions that have been read, you can respond to any of them and also give your final remarks. So who takes? Yeah, Sibel, right? Sibel.
I can start, and I'm sure Patricia will have more to add on the Nepal development country development country plan. We can certainly look at data to see what the OECD has as this wealth of data, and we can see what goes where. So that's what we can offer, is to look at this in more detail, if that would be interesting to understand a bit more what it looks like, the ODA for gender equality in Nepal. That's also public information, so it's also available online. In terms of the Russian colleague, I think Patricia maybe has more to share here, but what we have seen is that members are working in different ways. They're trying to innovate on the way that they support women's rights organizations and funds, and they do a lot of that through finding different channels, so working through the Equality Fund, for example, or women's alliances. So there are ways of reaching these organizations, and some have been doing this more than others, and they've been sharing these practices with the others. So, but I think Patricia's strategies were very interesting, and I'm sure she can add something on that as well.
Right. And please, will you give your final remarks, or that also includes your final? Right.
Yeah,
okay, Patricia. Great. Patricia.
Okay, thank you. Apparently, I didn't put, when the question was being asked, I still had it in Russia, and I heard only the last bit that talked about which organization am I representing? I lost the first bit, but I'm sure it is to do with the how other people can access the funding. So with the organization, I'm representing Plan International Ghana and Plan International Canada, but the funding is being done by Global Affairs Canada. So this is one of the ways, and Cyril mentioned earlier on that organizations are working out, donors are working out to ensure that they are intentional in providing direct funding that addresses some of the issues that we are talking about. And on that note, I would want to also say that Global Affairs has been very intentional and has a policy that guides that direction in order for us to apply these innovative ways that I have shared earlier on in addressing these gender gaps. And thankfully enough, they have launched the second phase of Women Voice and Leadership Project, phase 2, which hopefully, I don't know the time that the call will be open. So this gives us a great opportunity to tap into the call when it is open so that we can have some support externally to get this done. And then internally, we also support our partners, especially the local-led organizations, to be able to fundraise locally. So we support them building their capacity, giving them mentoring and coaching sections in fundraising and resource mobilization so that they don't rely only on the external sources of funding, but also the internal sources that can make them more relevant in all. And in conclusion, I think my closing remarks will be a remarks of appreciation, first of all, to the organizers for giving us the opportunity to share a typical example of how gender transformative financing is done from the INGO perspective and how we are allowing our local partners and the local actors that we work with take the driver's seat. So I thank you all for your attention and for your engagement in this section. We look forward to engage more in future. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you, Patricia and Sibel, for an excellent, wonderful presentation. What stands out for me for this section is the fact that in spite of the innovative interventions that are being done at the country level, there's still more room for improvement. We are still lacking behind, because one of the things that I see is that Sibel mentioned that funds targeted at gender equality is less than 1%. And when you look at the countries, let me take my country, Ghana, for example, you see that in our budget, the funds that are allocated for gender equality or funds that go to the Ministry of Gender Equality is less than 1%. And I'm asking myself that does the OECD percentage has any kind of impact on the countries as to the monies that they allocate to promote gender equality and women's empowerment. So as feminists, we really need to push for more to ensure that we have the needed resources to push for gender equality and women's empowerment. We have less than 5 minutes. We are yet to read our statement, but then it's also important to get participants to share some country level experiences in terms of transformative financing for gender equality. So we'll still open the floor again quickly. If we have 2 or 3 people, short 30 minutes contributions on what you are doing in your country to promote gender equality. If we have hands, if we don't have hands, we'll move straight to the position paper and we get Cynthia to read it for us. Do we have anyone? There is a colleague that from Afghanistan that wanted to share her country's experience. If you are with us, please, under a minute, can you tell us? A colleague asked that she would share their experience in Afghanistan. Please, if you were able to join, kindly share it under a minute. no sharing of country experiences. Then I'll move to Cynthia Sunu. Cynthia is the Senior Program Officer of NETRIGHT. She's a passionate women's rights advocate dedicated to the promotion of women's rights, gender equality, and social justice. She has over 10 years experience undertaking research, project design, coordination, monitoring, and evaluation. Where we call on Cynthia now to read our position paper for us. Cynthia.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for this very informative and comprehensive and insightful discussions that we've had this morning. It's an honor to read the position paper of the Feminist Group of the CSO Partnership for Development Effectiveness. I'll kindly crave your indulgence since it's quite long, and I apologize for that as well. So accelerating progress on implementation of gender equality commitments to meet sustainable development goals. Women's rights and gender equality are not only fundamental human rights, but have vital foundation for a peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable world. Yet they remain the greatest human rights challenge. While governments have made appreciable gradual progress in advancing women's rights and gender equality, structural inequalities persist in many countries, preventing the full achievement of women's rights and gender equality. At the current rate of progress, it will take about 131 years to reach full parity. While the global parity score has recovered to pre-pandemic levels, the overall rate of change has slowed down significantly, even reverting back to the time horizon of 100 years to parity projected in the 2020 edition would require significant acceleration of progress. The world's crises do not impact equally, let alone fairly. The disproportionate impacts on women's and girls' rights are well documented, yet still neglected. But the facts are evident. The disproportionate impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on women and girls, an overwhelming rollback on women's rights in Afghanistan, the widespread sexual violence characterizing the conflict in Ethiopia, attacks on abortion access in the US, and Turkey's withdrawal from the landmark Istanbul Convention on Gender-Based Violence are part of pushback on gains made on women's rights and gender equality. The past 2 years, which has been dominated by the COVID-19 pandemic, have impacted women and girls disproportionately. Domestic violence has increased. Job insecurity for women has worsened. Access to sexual and reproductive health services has been eroded. Girls' enrollment in schools has reduced dramatically in many places. Those already marginalized have been impacted the hardest. Countries, as a matter of urgency, must undertake institutional reforms to adjust to the needs of women's rights and gender equality agenda. The need to ensure local and country ownership is critical. Participation of women's rights groups in reforming systems and legislation continues to be quite low in many countries of the world. Decisions taken by governments and authorities that have worsened the situation of women and girls must be revoked. Development finance for gender equality and women's empowerment. The UN Women's Visualization data on countries' efforts to achieve gender equality by 2030 shows that only 13% have either met or almost met the target, 24% close to the target, 34% moderate to target, 15% far from target, and 13% very far from target. UN Women noted the data availability on SDG 5 is uneven. So is global progress, and where data are missing, women and girls are invisible. Only 48% of the data currently needed to monitor SDG 5 are available. There is an urgent need to accelerate progress, else the entire global community will fail to achieve SDG 5. Yet resources required for acceleration is not available. ODA, which is one of the major sources, seem to be depleting, as evidenced by the preliminary 2022 figures, which revealed significant redirection of ODA across Development Assistance Committee members towards humanitarian response, reconstruction, and refugee costs around the war in Ukraine and away from development countries. Gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls are prerequisites to the realization of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, inasmuch as there is the urgent need for the OECD DAC to raise its ODA substantially. That is not enough. Making progress on gender equality and empowerment of women and girls as envisaged by the 2030 Agenda, and coherence centered on human and women's rights, and putting all the resources available at the service of equality, justice, and peace and development. This implies addressing real transformations on envisioning global solidarity, funding and delivering resources versus aid traditional model. In sum, the whole system must pull in the same direction for the transformation as per the aspiration of the 2030 Agenda. The global donor community and international development partners must reaffirm their commitment to gender equality and achievement of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development by dedicating sufficient resources towards this focus. Unless this deliberate and purposeful financing for gender equality and women and girls empowerment is realized, all efforts for transformational development, fighting inequalities, and bridging the gender gaps will be pointless. In 2016 to 2017, DAC members targeted an average of USD 44.8 billion per year, corresponding to 38% of their bilateral allocable aid towards gender equality and women's equality as either a significant or principal objective. Support to programs specifically dedicated to gender equality and women's empowerment as their principal objective remains consistently low at 4%. 62% of aid is not targeting gender equality. In the economic and productive sectors, dedicated gender equality programming represented only 1% of total aid, and that is a decrease from the previous years. 9 DAC members focus 50% or more of their aid on gender equality as either a principal or significant objective. And those are Sweden, Ireland, Iceland, Canada, the Netherlands, Australia, Finland, Belgium, and Italy. Latest ODA figures reveal how donors continue to fall short on the 0.7% commitment. Only 5 organizations for the Economic Cooperation and Development Assistance Committee donor countries delivered, and that's Luxembourg, Sweden, Norway, Germany, and Denmark. The members are expected to shrink even further given the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic on economies around the world. Considering the pandemic, the CPDE Feminist Group re-emphasizes CPD's position on the urgency of effective development cooperation to aid efforts to achieve the 2030 Agenda and eradicate poverty and inequality. Achieving the future we want depends on concrete actions now. We reiterate the call for development efforts that advance countries' interests, focus on results, uphold transparency and accountability, encourage inclusive partnerships, and put primacy on human rights and enabling environments for civil society. Even though gender-responsive budgeting initiative began globally in the 90s, and UN Women has been supporting and advocating for the initiative, only 40 countries have adopted GRB. Despite civil society and women's rights organizations being recognized in Doha as the development actors in their own rights, and SDGs 17 emphasizing on partnership for the achievement of the sustainable development, there are still challenges in the area of transparency, accountability, participation and inclusion of civil society and women's organizations on government policy decision-making on finance. The Feminist Group of CSO Partnership for Development, FG, analysis of voluntary national review report in 2022 revealed that while countries report on many of the indicators of SDG 5, only few reports on 5C1. Country reports on 5C1 only enumerates funds allocated for gender equality and women's empowerment, but fail to show systems that have been put in place to allow public tracking of such allocations to enhance transparency and accountability. Now, these are our key acts. Our call for action. CPDE FG reiterates the need to integrate gender-responsive budgeting in countries' public financial management and financial management information system to ensure performance on gender equality and empowerment of women and girls, transparency and accountability in the use of public funds, so that no official feels it is an added burden. No person, group, community, or gender feels left out, as well as enable free access to information by the public. CPDE FG emphasizes on its key asks for the HLPF 2022. In addition, the public funds must be used in such a way that it does not perpetuate inequality and discrimination, rather transform it. More money and other resources as follow-up commitments on providing financial resources to women to be allocated from state budgets, local budgets, ODA, development funds, PPPs, private sector, and other domestic resources. Legal reforms on women's rights and gender equality, including earmarking quotas, increasing awareness on these needs and its correlation with overall sustainable development progress, capacity building, adoption of specific mechanisms of accountability, and advocacy within aid and development agenda and women's rights. Also, we call that accountability should be increased. Countries should be obligated to report on indicator 5C1, including reporting on gender equality as a cross-cutting issue of all the SDGs. To reduce inequalities in the world, SDG 5 and 10 should be reviewed in every HLPF. Since it is not reviewed annually, most countries do not report on SDG 5C1. Countries may not be reporting on the progress of indicator 5C1 due to lack of data, as it falls on tier 2. Therefore, the UN should take necessary steps in encouraging countries to produce data regularly. Communication gap and then follow-up monitoring also should be closed. Countries should introduce gender-responsive public financing systems, allocate funds, reform fiscal processes, capacitate staff, report to public annually, adjust global indicator to national level and monitor, strengthen the dark network on gender equality, to advocate for finance for transformative policy change based on the social institutions and gender index, which measures discrimination against women in social institutions across 180 countries. Make women CSOs participation mandatory for 5C1 monitoring at the country level. The CPDE Group and GPEDC. The CPDE Feminist Group participates through the CSO's global platform. CPDE in the Global Partnership for Development Effective Development Cooperation Monitoring that uses the GPEDC monitoring framework consisting of 10 indicators, with indicator 8 on countries have transparent systems to track public allocation for gender equality and women's empowerment. The inclusion of an indicator on women and gender equality was as a result of intensive international women's movement struggle over the years to widen development partners' commitments and accountability on women's rights and gender equality. CPDE Feminist Group calls for stronger advocacy at the national level for monitoring, addressing challenges, and reforming country systems to make commitments to women and girls fully transparent and accountable. By tracking and making public gender equality allocations, Governments promote greater transparency, which could result in better accountability. The CPDE-FG also calls for stronger advocacy at all levels for transformative financing for gender equality. Without just system of allocating public funds to reduce inequalities and discrimination, the aspiration of the 2030 agenda, leaving no one behind, will not be realized. The CPD is an open platform of civil societies around the world that is actively engaging with the official processes on aid and development agenda. The platform aims to continuously promote effective development cooperation, especially in development cooperation, and seeks the realization of human rights, social justice, and sustainability in development. The FG is one of the core constituencies of the CPD and has members from all regions of the world. And NETRIGHT is the current global coordinator of the CPDE Feminist Group. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Cynthia. We are behind time, 12 minutes late. I thank all. I think our position as CPDE Feminist Group is the position paper that Cynthia read. So it summarizes our reasons for intention for having this section. For me, I think we've achieved our intended objective. We are grateful to Sibel and Patricia for joining us to provide insights into how we can do transformative transformative financing for gender equality. The fact that, yes, we are doing a lot of work at the country level, but we need to push for more because, of course, less than 1% is not what we intend to do. We need more funds. We are looking at direct funding. We are looking at coherent quality funding that goes directly to women rights organizations. And I think together we should let this work. We have our participants list in the chat. I believe you've all completed the participants list. Please let's put our cameras on and take a picture. Thank you all for coming. Can we have our cameras on and take a picture?
I can. Hi guys, I'll count 1, 2, 3. One more. I think some people are not yet, have not turned on their camera. Okay, one more. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
And thank you, FG Core Group, for pushing this
Say a bit more because there's a lot of us.
Okay. We are also grateful to our comms team, Fanny, Meg, and the group for providing us with an excellent comms support. Thank you all for coming.
1, 2, 3.
Whilst waiting for the pictures to end, those who are not members of CPD or the feminist group, please go to the CPD website. You'll find processes to become a member. You can complete a form. You can also, if you want to join the feminist group, you can send email to info@netrightghana.org, and then we'll respond. Depending on which region you are, would forward the email to the regional coordinator and they will get in touch with you. Or you go to the CSO partnership website and then they would forward your application to us. Thank you all for joining. We are most grateful. Fanny, are we done? info@NETRIGHT Ghana. The Ghana is missing out. NETRIGHT Ghana. Right. You can go to the CSO partnership website to register. And kindly fill the participants list form before you leave. We can reach out to you through the email addresses that you provide. So please complete the form. Are we done with the pictures? We are losing the participants. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So thank you all for coming. We are grateful. Thank you all.
Thank you, colleagues.
Right.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you too.
Right. Bye.
Clap,
Thank
clap,
you.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
And thank you to our excellent interpreters.
Yes. Thank you, CPD Secretariat, for support, and thank you for excellent webinar.
Thank you.
And
Bye.
we are very sure that this transformative financing agenda
Excellent
will
work.
advance further. Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you, Shanta. Thank you, Rosabel, Nugu, Valentina, Mama Kwete, which name? Nevin? Have I forgotten any name? Thank you all.
Patricia, I think maybe we should have a brief meeting. You can organize as a
Shanta, let's